Lawrence, why don't you tell everyone where you're located?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lawrence. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Ambient. We are an AI assistant for operators, chiefs of staff, heads of operations. I am located in San Francisco.
Cool. And I'll do more bio intros too here, but Sophie, do you want to tell everyone where you're located?
Yeah, I'm also in San Francisco, and I'll let you introduce me properly. But I'm Sophie. I lead enterprise and AI at Vouch.
Awesome. Ooh, I see a Seattle on here. I was born and raised 36 years in Seattle. I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska now. We moved here when we had a baby. My husband's from here, so very different than Seattle, but it's a good place. It's a good place to have a family for sure. Awesome. We've got London, we've got Sao Paulo. We've got all over the US, Nigeria, amazing. Yakima, shout out to the east side of the mountains in Washington State. Okay, cool. So we're going to get going here. If you have just joined us, please pop into the chat and put your location, your role, your industry, and company size in terms of number of employees. My team will be monitoring the chat, but just a reminder to put questions in the Q&A portion of this webinar. We will monitor questions throughout this chat. I don't know if we're going to be able to save a good chunk of time at the end for questions. If we have that, we will totally use it. But we're going to kind of kick off and go through lots of stuff here and address questions as they come up. So let's get going. Welcome everyone to today's Nova Chat for Chiefs of Staff around writing the AI policy for your company. So we're going to dive into a number of topics from why it should be the chief of staff owning the AI policy writing to key considerations from a legal and business focus to exactly how to kick off the process. So every registered attendee, this question will come up a few times, but every registered attendee for this webinar will receive an email with this recording and a very generous AI policy writing guide from Sophie's team at Vouch and an AI policy example in that guide, as well as a workstream kickoff kind of project management template that I'll be working on behind the scenes here from the chief of staff perspective and sending out after this call to all of you. So before we dive in, I'll share a little bit about Nova Chief of Staff. We are the premier destination for Chief of Staff development and education. We launched the Nova Chief of Staff certification course almost exactly a year ago. And we have over 450 students now across 20 countries and rave reviews, which nothing makes me happier. It's online, it's self-paced, includes personal touch points with me. Additionally, we just launched a brand new course for chiefs of staff around leveraging AI use. It's about 5 hours of recorded content from guest instructor Jessica McBride, who you all may know, and includes lots of hands-on practice diving into AI, prompting, and much more for chief of staff applications like business planning and project management, event oversight, and more. So check that out at novachiefofstaff.com if you're interested. Okay, that's enough about Nova. Let me introduce our guests. So first, we have Mr. Lawrence Coburn. Lawrence is the CEO and co-founder of Ambient, an AI assistant purpose-built for chiefs of staff and head ops roles. Previously, he co-founded Twine, a leader in network software, and Double Dutch, the market leader for mobile events apps. Lawrence lives in the Mission District of San Francisco with his entrepreneur wife and 13-year-old daughter. And when he's not working, you can find him riding a bicycle or playing tennis with his daughter. And then we have Sophie McNaught. Sophie is the AI go-to-market lead at Vouch Insurance. So she's a corporate lawyer and insurance advisor, adeptly navigating the intertwining paths of legal, risk management, and technology. Her niche is offering expert advice on regulatory matters such as AI risk management and data privacy. She is also experienced with helping venture-backed companies to fundraise and navigate the complexities of working with Fortune 500 companies. Welcome, Sophie and Lawrence.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you very
happy to have
much.
you here. So we've set this Nova Chat up a bit like what may exist in your company as you approach writing an AI policy. So we're going to dive into that, but you kind of have me here as your chief of staff. You've got Sophie on the legal compliance risk side of things. And then we've got Lawrence, kind of a longtime CEO, business mind, entrepreneur, who's going to be able to think about all the things, opportunities, why we lean in and all of that. So hopefully the combination of all three of us will help everybody understand a little bit more about what this policy writing could look like. Before I turn it over to Lawrence and Sophie, I want to talk a little bit about why AI policy writing is an excellent task for a chief of staff to take on. And truly, there's no one better suited than a chief of staff to take this project on in balancing risk and opportunity and running transformative cross-company, cross-collaborative projects, leading major strategic initiatives. Lawrence has brought up that we've got risk for a reason. I've worked with legal for many purposes in my current and past lives, and it's working with legal, working with compliance is intended to be advisory, right? Versus CEO, chief of staff is intended to make strategic decisions for the purpose of the company and moving forward, weighing all the advisory conversations and the risk and all of that, but leaving that decision and the policy writing up to someone other than kind of that massive generalist point of view of a CEO, entrepreneur type chief of staff is going to lead us in the wrong direction. So we're going to dive into that. But essentially, chiefs of staff, like, you have this opportunity now to kind of stamp a career ticket and run point on this majorly transformative initiative and be at the front of something that's changing the future of how we work. So we're going to dive into that. Lawrence, anything else you have to add there on why it should be the chief of staff doing the AI policy writing?
Yeah, I think you said a lot of the right things. I think the lens matters here. And I think if your general counsel writes the AI policy for your company, you're going to be putting risk first. If your CTO writes the AI policy for your company, you're going to be putting data security, information security first. If your CEO or your chief of staff or your head of operations writes the policy, I think it's going to be more holistic. I think you're going to be thinking about risk, of course, because you care about the business, but I think you're going to be thinking about the historic opportunity around this tech. And I'm going to say the most controversial thing I'm going to say for the whole hour right now. I'm going to get it off my back. And so when you think about AI policy writing, where my head goes, it goes to controls, it goes to safeguards, it goes to restrictions, it goes to ethics. And these are not bad things. These are, of course, when you talk about AI ethics, it's really important. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think the biggest risk for the people on this call and the companies that employ the people on this call are not leaning into this wave enough. So just think about that as you start to think about what your AI policy is. It's not just controls and risk avoidance. It's leaning into the opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. And I can't imagine Sophie, this is no like dig at someone in legal or compliance, but it's just not intended a cross company, cross collaborative project where you are working with major stakeholders across your whole company in different categories of your business. When you're diving in deep with each of those categories, when you're reporting back, I mean, who's going to do that? I can't think of anybody better than a chief of staff for this role. Sophie, do you have any thoughts there before we kind of move on to the business applications of why we need to write this policy?
Yeah, I think the thing that's unique about AI is ordinarily it makes a lot of sense for your policies to be owned by legal and risk because they are focused on purely legal and risk matters. The thing with AI, of course, you guys have just explained, you've got to be focusing more on the business opportunity. And for nearly every company right now, it almost doesn't matter what size you are or what industry you're in, it's going to be strategic. So as we're talking about your AI policy, we're also kind of talking about your AI strategy. And maybe that's a better way to frame it, where of course you need legal and risk in that conversation. And Maggie mentioned, of course, there's advisory roles there, but the thing that's so unique about it is the chief of staff is really well positioned because this is a strategy problem to solve. And your legal and risk team aren't resourced in a way that they can really put the horsepower behind it that they would need to be successful. They will do their job exactly as they're meant to do their job.
Yeah. Very fair. Okay, so Lawrence, let's talk about the business opportunity and business risk. So the opportunity for companies getting ahead of the AI wave and the risk for companies that are kind of ignoring it.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. So I think the opportunity is historic. Historic. In Silicon Valley, we talk about these foundational platform shifts happening about every 14 years. Like there was the internet itself in like 98, 99. There was mobile, which was sort of the next big one, which really exploded like, 2010. And now there's AI. And the feeling that I'm getting from where I'm sitting in San Francisco, and I'm in the same neighborhood as OpenAI. Like, if you go to the coffee shops around here, you're going to hear one topic, actually maybe two: politics and AI. Like those are the two. The feeling here in San Francisco, and I think Sophie would agree with me, is that this is the big one. I'm increasingly getting nervous about the scale of the opportunity. And what I mean by nervous is that there's been this ongoing metaphor for AI that it's like this supercharged assistant that's going to make everybody a 20x employee. And I'm starting to feel that I can see the signs of knowledge worker replacement, right? So when we start talking about AI agents, these are things that can do things better than I can in a lot of areas already. And the tech is improving 2 to 5x a year. So I'll just say, like, I'll end with one quick metaphor about the size of the opportunity. I have a bunch of venture capital friends, and they are saying that the thing they are looking for is the first $1 billion revenue company that is run by one person. And that's going to be the moment. And they think that's in reach now for the first time, where one person assisted by AI across every department can do the work of 500, 1,000 people. And so that's kind of a crazy vision of the future, but that's the scale of the opportunity that we're talking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that feels like a very, you've painted the picture of the environment that we're in, and you're both in San Francisco, which is the heart of all of it. Super, super fascinating. So that's the environment we are in. The opportunity is clear. What are the risks for people, for companies that are not paying attention and that are just kind of ignoring? I mean, I know a lot of people on this call, a lot of companies out there who just really aren't exploring. They're not understanding the use. They're not understanding what their employees are doing, and they have no interest in really diving in at all.
Yeah, I'll start us off on that, and I want to hear from Sophie. I'll talk about sort of the opportunity risk, and so we're seeing it firsthand. So I interviewed, as we were building out Ambient, I interviewed 350 chiefs of staff from companies of all sizes, and what was striking to me is that the small companies, the startups, the desperate ones that are just trying to survive another day, they're like, let's go. We're going to try all the AI. If it can give us a chance to win, we are going to try it. The larger enterprises, the ones that are market leaders or close to it, that have strong general counsels, that have strong CTOs, like these folks are saying, not yet, not yet. We're going to wait and see. We're going to wait and see. And so I think this is natural. I think if you're commanding a market leadership, you're going to be a little more conservative because you have to protect the thing you have. And if you're small and desperate with nothing to lose, you're going to try anything it takes to survive and to win. So I think that sort of gulf is sort of sets the landscape. And so I think the opportunity is we're talking on magnitudes of 3, 5, 7x more productive if you leverage this technology versus if you don't. So I think that's not a level playing field. If you have two competitors, one that's using and one that's not, so you don't want to be on the not side. I think we have enough data to say that right now you do not want to be on the dinosaur side here.
Yeah. Sophie, do you want to chime in around the risks to
Yeah,
ignoring?
it depends. I mean, as Lawrence said, it depends so much on the company size, but I actually don't know many companies that aren't, they're at least talking about this in the boardroom. It doesn't matter what size you are.
Yeah.
There's different levels of adoption and comfort. And again, it depends if you're in a regulated industry, what kind of your governance process it looks like. But ultimately, the problem with not getting out ahead of it and putting things in place for it is that your employees are going to be using it in some way anyway. That's my number one thing. So when we think about writing a policy or getting strategic alignment on what your company's view is on the use of it in your company or how core it is to your future strategy, is there's risks that you are currently exposed to that you probably aren't even aware of. And so for us, one of the first things that we would encourage anyone to do, if you are a chief of staff and you're trying to get your head around what's happening in your company, is to actually do an audit, to the extent that that's possible, of all the use cases today and all the potential in each of the different business units and or functions in your company. Because they're probably already using it. I mean, I am someone who, even just ChatGPT, I use it every day. And I think that's basically true across a lot of companies, especially if you are a knowledge worker. There's just so much potential for individuals there to get a lot of leverage in their day without needing to go through their own internal enterprise processes to get approvals. That's just one really basic example of how your employees may already be using it, and that you may be exposed to risk because you haven't been really clear around guidelines of what data to put in, what not to put in, and the consequences of that going wrong. I noticed in the chat as well, there was quite a large number of people who said that they work in the healthcare space. Again, regulated industry where privacy is paramount and sensitive data. Almost all data is sensitive. So that's one piece of just being aware of it. The other reason I recommend people start with that process is because, again, going back to not just the risks of what risks are you not aware of, but also all of the people in those functions will be best equipped to be able to communicate, or the best equipped to analyze how AI can make them better at their jobs, or where there's opportunity there for the business to leverage, because they've got their own networks. They're more tapped in, obviously, to their day-to-day. The other thing I want to also add, I've spoken to companies of all different sizes around this, and it's okay if you're a kind of mid-sized company to be a bit more hesitant in adoption. I think even about 6 months ago, 9 months ago, there was a lot of pressure, especially from boards, to be like, I need my AI strategy today. So what are we doing? What are we doing for AI? And now, Lawrence mentioned the speed at which it's developing. It is developing in such a way, you don't want to miss it because it's getting a lot better. But also, even if you're thinking about what tools you should be adopting internally, a lot of the software that you already use or the vendors that you already use, and now not just adding features, but they're making AI core to their business as well. So if you jump the gun and go out looking for point solutions to every potential operational efficiency, which I think would have been what people did if they were trying to do this 6 months ago, then you're probably introducing a whole bunch of operational complexity that's not necessary.
Yeah, the use cases are going to become clearer and clearer as the technology improves. And I think, Lawrence, you've shared on a previous call that when people are concerned, okay, I'm going to be, people may have, heard you will be left behind if you're not adopting AI. And I believe, Lawrence, your thoughts there are, well, it's going to be easier and easier to adopt. So don't worry too much about that because we're all going to be using it here soon. And that was 6 months ago, I think, that you said that.
Yeah, and things are changing quickly. I'm with Sophie that I have not met a company in the last 2 months that does not have this being discussed at in their boardroom. So
In their boardroom,
every size company, and
yeah.
there's real business risk here. Not just the risk of getting left behind, the risk of the AI getting it wrong, or the risk of AI if you're using AI for your recruiting, for example, the risk of AI damaging your brand and being offensive or being racist or transferring some of the bias that's in the training data to the end user. This is real risk. So please, do not get me wrong. If you are a mid-sized company, market leader, you just have to be a little more conservative. It's the nature of business. So totally understood.
Yeah, that makes sense. So should we spend a couple more minutes here talking about the obstacles of AI adoption and the difficulties that people are going to run into as they start thinking about writing the AI policy for their company? Sophie, do you want to start here, or Laura?
Go ahead, Sophie. Yeah, and I'll chime in.
Okay.
Yeah. The first obstacle the most obvious obstacle is going to be resistance from your governance team, because there's a lot of unknown. And that's why, of course, you want to try and get that strategic alignment at the executive level around the fact that this is something that you need a philosophy on it internally, basically. Like, we, for example, we're a regulated company, of course, we're in the insurance industry. It's very important that we take every aspect of risk and legal very seriously. But we are also a very AI forward company, and we're looking for use cases constantly for how it can be making us better. So that philosophy is one piece of it. The number one obstacle is going that if you only tackle one thing, it's going to be, let's come up with our approach to data security. Like, what is who internally is responsible for decisions around that? And how do we need to beef that up? Because of all the different issues Lawrence mentioned, reputational issues of things going wrong, potential recruitment issues. We've touched on vendor management pieces, but truly, if you only think about one issue, it's going to be, what data do we have? How is it more exposed if we were to be using AI? And let's use that as our guiding star for working out internally what use cases are going to be prohibited, what needs approval, and what people have free reign to go and do.
I think that's really well said. I know when my team is on sales calls, we try and identify what are the blockers to getting ambient in the hands of these companies. And we've identified sort of 3 areas that work for us with the kind of product that we're selling. And so the first one is just like Sophie says, it's information security. So did you build your own model? No, of course not. Who are you using? We're using OpenAI. Tell us about what can OpenAI do with that data? Can they train their model on that data? Are they storing that data? No, they're not storing the data. They're processing the data. We use their enterprise API. It comes back to you. What are you doing with that data? Do we own our data? Are you training your models on that data? No, we're only training for the purposes of your use. So these are all kind of like the savvy customers are asking us about, where is the data? Where is the data stored? Now, I actually think this is a surmountable obstacle because the industry has figured out cloud computing. So AWS, Azure, a lot of companies' data is flying around the internet anyway, like in a secure way. And so I feel like that is solvable. The second bucket of obstacle that we see is legal, which is the general counsel saying, we don't want to record meetings because we don't want the transcript used in a lawsuit 10 years from now, for example. And this is a tricky one. So a lot of things you do at work are recorded, like the code that you write, the emails that you write, but meetings historically have not always been recorded. So it's a scary thing to get things that are off the cuff suddenly on the public record. And then the third bucket of obstacle that we see, which is the toughest to deal with, is the behavioral or cultural. Some companies, for whatever the reason, are not wanting to lean into the new stuff. And I'll give you a very strange example, but here in San Francisco, you see the driverless Waymo cars everywhere. And it's a political lightning rod, right? It's people hate them or they love them. They've actually been attacked and set on fire. And I think that there's just a very human reaction to new and scary technology that is totally understandable. Like, is this thing going to come and take my job? That leads to all sorts of like uncomfort with embracing new behaviors. And that's the one where it's just going to take time, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so what I want to do now is dive into a little bit of the tactical how do we kickstart? What do we think about when we're turning to actually writing the AI policy for our company? And as a reminder to everyone on the call, Sophie's team at Vouch has an incredible AI policy writing guide that we will send out after this call. It has an example of a policy in there. You'll also receive kind of a workstream kickoff template from me in this follow-up email. But to dive in now, so just know you're going to get a resource to help you, but to kind of talk about and think about how we kick this process off. Sophie, what are the primary considerations, step 0 for a chief of staff to take before they even start? Maybe these folks on the call, right? Like, we haven't even started writing an AI policy. What are the things we should be thinking about very, very, very first before we get started?
So I would start with a template. I would then, so number one is actually coming up with your internal principles on AI. Your policy will have to be principles based. And this kind of goes back to my view that you need a philosophy internally that reflects the values of your company and also the risk tolerance of your governance, board, committee, whoever is responsible for that. A lot of companies that I talk to, they've set up various working groups for this kind of thing where they've got like a cross-functional team who's bringing that insight from all the different parts of the business. People have said that that works well. Again, depends so much on the size of the business and the nature of the business. But getting kind of clear on philosophy, principles, and getting that down on paper, that then informs what are your actual priorities across the business, and who do you need, what stakeholders do you need in the room to actually make decisions on those things. That's very likely going to be security people, product people, and of course your legal and governance people will be in those conversations as well. But you most likely will find there's a few key areas where there's going to be a lot of pushback, but also where there's that most opportunity, which is everything we've been talking about. And that's where you can actually spin up projects around that. As part of that, that's where I would then be looking at where, like, how could you do an audit around those areas internally? Again, getting that all on paper so that you're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And once you kind of get through those hurdles, what you're looking at is trying to get down on paper your guidelines, and our guide gives you some indication of how we approach this. Like I've actually shared our internal policy, but getting down on paper what those prohibited uses are, what accepted but approval uses are, and then the permitted uses. That's almost the final step, just in getting the first draft done. Now, something I want to highlight here as well, the version that we'll be sharing with you is one that we wrote a while ago now. I think it was over a year ago. And we have made changes to that. And as with anything, these things evolve. You can go back and change it. But at least then you've got something kind of practical there to go out and use. And then the final piece, of course, and I'll let Lawrence talk about this as well, is figuring out the best way that you want to be communicating that to employees. So the whole point of this, as I said, this is actually a strategy exercise more so than a legal exercise. Like I've actually spoken to a bunch of lawyers who have said, we deliberately didn't want to put a policy in place because it's moving so fast that we didn't want something that outside counsel could point to, or if we end up in an issue that we haven't complied with, or there's a bunch of things where they're like, we don't actually want this down on paper. And so that's why I see it more as almost a strategy document heavily informed by legal and compliance, that everybody is involved in contributing to.
I really like that. One additional thing that I'm hearing from the chiefs of staff that I talk to is like the most advanced companies, like when they set up their committee. So Sophie talked about identifying the group of people that are going to sort of be the stewards for this initiative, for the strategy document. It needs to be cross-departmental because every department will have their lens and it will be different. So you want to make sure you have kind of voices of each of those. And I think Sophie alluded to this as well. Is like, you need an executive champion. I think it should be the CEO. So like if the chief of staff is running point on this, it needs to be clear that the CEO is behind it and that this is coming from the very top. And even the CEO might want to say this is a board level initiative. So just have the weight of sort of like the executive team supporting the actual committee that's doing the work. Yeah. And then one last piece, which is a little more on the technical side. Sophie has mentioned audits a couple of times, and it's absolutely crucial just as a way to quality check. Like, is your HR recruiting software demonstrating the values that your human recruiter would have? So spot check, spot side by side. Again, to use the Waymo example, when you saw the Waymos driving around for years and years and years in San Francisco, there was a human in the driver's seat, sometimes hands on the wheel, sometimes not, but there was this concept of human in the loop. So it's auditing, it's doing side-by-side spot checks. And then for the really advanced companies, and you may need to lean on your vendors for this, there needs to be some sort of automated monitoring of these tools. And this is not a new concept in the software world, like this idea of like sort of automated monitoring, kind of checking for bugs at a systems level in an automated way. This is what engineers do. They build the app and then they build the way to sort of test the app. So you just didn't make sure that your vendor has those things in place too.
Lawrence, automated monitoring, sorry, just to clarify, automated monitoring for your AI tools?
Yes.
Okay.
It's to make sure they're not going off the rails. And part of that can be done with audits. Like we're gonna do a spot check every couple of weeks.
Yep.
Human audits, but audits by themselves are not going to catch everything.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just going to add something super tactical there. I know we're trying to give people practical things to do, but when I talk about audits, an employee survey is one aspect of what I'm talking about, so that you can show up to that meeting and say, 60% of our workforce is using some version of an LLM every day in their work. Here's what they've said they're using it for. Here's how many hours they're saying it's saving them in a week. Like, it's that classic sort of operational efficiency, defining the business use case piece of it. And I'd say one thing that has changed in the last 9 months is, I think we would have previously said, like, are you using AI? Now I think you can be a little bit more sophisticated in your questions, where it's like, okay, are you using ChatGPT? Okay, is there software that you use every day that has now integrated AI that is saving you time in your team? Okay, if you're trying to quantify how this might be impacting future recruitment planning or like headcount planning, there's specific questions that you can ask there around operational efficiencies within the team. So it's a little bit less like, are you using AI? Yeah, that'd be my comment.
Yeah. I love the employee survey point. Chiefs of staff, we love employee surveys. We love being connected to the culture of our team. And I think this is a really, really good use case for some good stats. And to your point, it's which AI platforms are you using? Which platforms are you using that you don't know if that vendor is using AI or not? And then that points us in the direction of like what to kind of go research and figure out a little bit more. I wanted to ask, because I think it's a pretty common question of a board or an executive team around the projection of improving business with a new tool. So how would a chief of staff or maybe somebody else who's using a platform project the business improvement made? Is it just as easy as, okay, well, we know it's 2 to 5x and we apply that rough math to our work today? Or is there a little bit more complex modeling to be done? How do you approach projecting the impact of AI on your business today, or let's say next year or 5 years from now?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think what we encourage our customers to do in early days is just to look at time savings. Like, it's an easy one. Like, how many hours did this workflow used to take you versus how many does it take you now? And it's a little bit of a pain, but just sort of logging sort of that hours back. And it's important to say those are not hours back for you to just go like me, ride the bicycle or play tennis. It's hours back. So presumably you can focus on more strategic things that move the company forward farther. And so I think it starts with hours, and then it starts to move into sort of tighter operational execution. And then, like all enterprise software, comes down to dollars saved or dollars made. Does it help you save money or does it help you make money? And I think AI software will be no different than that.
Okay. Sophie, are you aligned there? Anything else to add on the projection of the impact of AI to your business?
No, I think, and also a lot of my experience is, I said no, but I do have one comment. A lot of my experiences with venture-backed companies, and so one way that we talk about quantifying it is, how can the adoption of this tool push out the need for additional headcount? Because venture-backed companies are thinking a lot about runway and timing. So that's another thing that I find myself talking about a lot.
Yeah. Okay. I'm still kind of hanging on to the like financial impact. So Lawrence, in your scenario, you would use the time saving of hourly rate or the impact of taking on a more strategic project and kind of apply that to a revenue benefit.
Yeah, I think so. And there's many startups that are working on the more on the revenue side of the house. We're working more on the operational
Yep.
execution side of
Yep.
the house.
Yep.
And to give you an example, like I know folks working on sort of AI powered SDRs, right, or agentic sales teams that
Mm-hmm.
will replace your SDR team and will make the outbound emails and the outbound LinkedIn messages, and we'll follow up and we'll schedule meetings. And so all the things that those 80K a year SDRs used to do, the software is already starting to do. So
Yeah.
that starts to become both money saved and actually like closing deals.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And on that, because obviously headcount is very financial. I've just seen in the Q&A, there's a question here of someone has asked, my concern now is, does that mean if a $1 billion company is able to be run by one person, what about EA jobs? Are we at risk of losing our jobs now? And my personal view on this is, it, like any job, it just means that the role now needs to be more strategic. There's a lot of things that right now AI is not great at. It doesn't tend to have organizational context. It doesn't have relationships. It's not brilliant at future planning. Where it is today is a little bit more like a really intelligent college graduate that can be taught and manipulated and given skill sets. So, potentially, yes, it could be given a classic EA skill set. Obviously, the main thing that people are thinking about in AI is agents, building AI agents. But yeah, the relationships, this really strategic nature of your role is what makes all of us continue to be relevant, I think.
Yeah. And I think from an EA and chief of staff perspective, it's that expert generalist type role where, both of these roles are excellent at a lot of different things from a huge breadth perspective versus one highly technical skill that can be taught and potentially automated. I don't know if you two have any thoughts there, but I hear that a lot. I also hear a lot that, it's not that AI is taking our job. It's that we have to and we will become adept at using AI to complement our role. And then, as you mentioned, Sophie, of course, becoming more strategic from that EA perspective. But anything else to add there for either of you?
Yeah, I got one more sort of very vivid example of that. So when we started Ambient, the original mission was, could we build an AI chief of staff? And for companies that didn't have one, because it felt like an important role that most companies hadn't discovered yet. And so we did a bunch of interviews, and I came to the conclusion that we could not. And it was because of the human trust that exists where a chief of staff or a senior EA, it's not just an assistant. It's someone who is kind of like in the foxhole with the founder or the CEO, someone a consigliere. It's part therapist. And so these are things that we felt were out of reach for AI. So we sort of shifted our focus to say, okay, let's help the chief of staff do the work of three, kind of thing. As time goes by, I get a little more nervous. I get a little more nervous that this is not the amazing super assistant that we all were hoping for, that eventually it is going to take some of our jobs. But if you believe like Sophie, which I do, which is all of human history has been big technological advancements, and humans have always found a way to find a place above in a more strategic area. That's the way it should play out. It's not to say there's not going to be a lot of pain. Just look at when manufacturing moved out of a lot of places in the United States. So there will be pain, but there is opportunities to keep up leveling, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to circle back here and kind of put the bow on the conversation around getting started writing our AI policy guide. So I think that one thing that we should touch on that wasn't touched on before is that conversation with your CEO or your business leader, right? So I will include this list of questions to maybe start the conversation with your business leader, but as a chief of staff, you always need to be on the same page as your business leader, right? So asking the right questions and doing your best to deeply understand their goals around AI use and implementation and communication will be really important. So what are their primary objectives for implementing AI? How do they envision AI aligning with the overall business strategy and goals? What specific areas or functions do you see AI having the most impact on our company? And of course, they may not know all these answers, and we know that that's part of our job to go figure out what other questions we should be asking and potentially recommending. But this is a good place to start. So what are your concerns about ethics of AI in our operation? How do you define success for our AI initiatives? Level of transparency you may want to maintain with all of our stakeholders around AI. There was a good question in the chat here around, do we make this policy public? Is this a public policy? Is this just an internal policy? And maybe we can touch on that in a minute. Key outcomes that you expect from this AI policy in terms of business transformation or transparency, and how do we want to communicate this policy to employees? Okay, so you have this conversation. You then maybe before this conversation or after, you put together an employee survey and try to deeply understand today's environment of the uses of AI across your company. You are starting a project management template. Again, I'll send you a draft of kind of where we can start here, but you're starting a template that identifies things like key stakeholders, key objections. There's a lot more in Sophie's guide that you can dive into here, but primary concerns, goals, timeline, and any other work streams that you identify, and we'll kick you off here too. You're identifying the purpose, the scope, the key definitions, which, maybe we could dive into in a minute, Sophie, what Gen Tech is. I see that a lot in your guide, and I think it could be helpful to just define that for the people on the call here. Roles, responsibilities, and then you finally, once you've explored all of these work streams, you've built your committee, as Lawrence mentioned, you've identified next steps and all of the things, right, that we do as chiefs of staff to be excellent project managers, then we start writing that policy and using, early on, we've already brought in legal and compliance, and they're helping us advise us and think about the language and the use and the substance of the policy. So we'll continue on that front post call. We'll send you an email with some of the things that can help you get started there, because I know that's why a lot of you are here, and I'm excited for you all to get started on it, and we'd love to hear how it's going. So you have our contact information. You'll get it again in our post call, but definitely circle back with us. If you start writing your AI policy and this call was helpful to you, or you have feedback for us, or just let us know how it's going. I know that Lawrence, Sophie, and I would love to hear how it's going for you as you take on this initiative. So let's dive back in a little bit to these details. Let's first talk about Gen Tech. What is Gen Tech, Sophie?
We called it Gen Tech because that was our best way of describing generative AI technology. And at the time we wrote the policy, it wasn't clear how embedded. Well, we knew it would become embedded in a lot of different things, but it's just a bit of a catch-all really for AI. I think I've been on a bunch of events and panels where people are like, well, how do you even define AI? There's so many different pieces to it. And, machine learning was the original AI, and that's been around for years. And I think my answer to that, and I'm sure everyone here would probably agree, is when we're talking about AI, we're talking about what has just erupted in the last 2 years when OpenAI made ChatGPT public. And then that has led to an absolute flood of investment and business formation in companies that are leveraging that technology. And that in itself poses a whole bunch of risks. So when we talk about it, it's not just, of course, going on and using the consumer interface of ChatGPT. It's your classic vendor management process of what tools that you're using day to day in your company are leveraging some kind of AI, and how does that pose additional risk to you?
Okay. So let's pivot a little bit to kind of the go to market with our AI policy. And Lawrence, I don't know if you want to start here, take this one, but okay, we've written the policy, we feel super accomplished, we've done it, we have a great policy that we're proud of. How do we teach this to our employee base? How do we communicate our policy, and how do we hold people to it?
Yeah, I think Sophie's going to have better thoughts. I'll start us off, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sophie. But I think the good news with a lot of these topics is that we're not starting from zero. Presumably, many of the companies out there on this call, they have company values that are meant to be lenses to guide how we make decisions at this company, right? We have an employee handbook. We have we have an L&D team depending on the scale of the company. So I think you have lots of channels to get to your people. Your company probably has ways to get change initiatives out to your team. Leverage those channels. But I want to hear from Sophie on this.
Yeah, one of the key thing is, of course, Lawrence mentioned leveraging what you already have. And in most instances, it will be a matter of figuring out, it's kind of like when any new technology pops up. And if you're a lawyer, you're used to doing this, but this is true of nearly any function, is you've got an existing set of laws and then something comes in and then it's your job to figure out how it affects all of those laws. This is really no different. Where you've got all your normal processes of your security screenings when you want to introduce new technology, obviously the policies in place, the approval processes, all those things should probably already be there. And then you're just kind of making it clearer to employees how this fits into that. I think the key thing from a communication standpoint, and I keep stressing this because I think it's something that my own company has done well, is alongside communicating what they cannot do, that you're communicating the company's philosophy. Like, we are very vocal that we are an AI adopting company. I don't know the right phrase for that, but we are AI forward, and we are trying to get feedback from our employee base about how we should be doing this. It's rather than policing. It's just a very different, and to keep that in mind as you're communicating this to employees, rather than it being like a slap on the hand. And obviously you'll have to be communicating the key things that are prohibited, and the obvious thing that would be prohibited for nearly anyone is going to be putting any sensitive customer data into one of these tools, or just making sure that's not happening inadvertently. So yeah, high level answer. But
and how about the question around sharing the AI policy publicly, externally? I mean, there's probably multiple policies here, right? You have like an employee use policy. You may have some form of a transparency document around AI use in your company, maybe for your customers' perspective, especially if you're B2B or B2C. I mean, both really, B2B and B2C are gonna need to share some of that. So what does that look like?
The only reason I can see for sharing it externally is if it's a go-to-market tactic for your business. If it's actually a sales tool, because you're finding there's a lot of, you're getting a lot of resistance from the market in selling your product, because they have a lot of the questions that Lawrence was talking about of, are you training? What are you doing with this stuff? Like, it can be a way to develop trust, but that's a sales and marketing tool if you're sharing it externally. If you're really thinking about risk management, there's really two ways that you can manage your risk when you're thinking about it sort of external to the business. One is you do it with your indemnities in your contracts, and number two is you do it with your insurance. So indemnities and contracts, again, that's going to be market facing, because anyone who you're selling to will have access to that. Similarly, if you're a software company, your terms of service tend to be available quite publicly as well. And then, of course, insurance is a separate piece to that.
Yeah.
I'll just add on to the sort of the sales and marketing tactic of exposing your AI policy. There's some good comps within the remote work world, like, companies were sharing the remote work policy. I think Atlassian has got a lot of kind of sales and marketing juice out of exposing how they do it, and they do it really well, and they run conferences on it, and also their software helps remote teams collaborate, so it makes sense. And I think GitHub is another one that has done GitLab has done a good job of exposing how they do it as a model, and it helps build the brand. So if you're AI adjacent, I mean, I'm getting the light bulb right now. Maybe we should write our policy and get it out there. Thank you, Sophie.
I love that. Okay, we have a question here from Sasha, and this is a really valid question. Any thoughts on how to manage the delicate political dynamics of a chief of staff delivering the AI policy draft rather than, let's say, someone else in the C-suite, like CTO or chief product officer, who may see this as overstepping? My first thoughts here would be to make them your executive champion of this project, to give them a lens into all the steps, to give them approval, to bring them in for collaboration, but save them the giant workload that's going to remove them from their business. This is such a cross-collaborative project that really, as we mentioned, there's really nobody better for it because chiefs of staff work cross-collaboratively on so many kind of project management style projects. And that's the purpose of their role, to fill a gap in that way. This would truly take an executive. I can't even imagine some of the C-suite members that I've worked with, like really coming out of their business to lead a cross-functional project, and the need to dive in so deep and then also at such a high level. I think you just position it as saving them the work, but giving them some eyes and approval on the work as the executive champion. But Sophie, Lawrence, anything else to add there?
Oh, I love this topic. I love this dynamic of the power of the chief of staff coming from their lack of structural power, where they don't have an org, they don't have a budget, yet they somehow command this incredible influence. So I think it's such a no-brainer. Like, you want to make this thing apolitical as possible, right? Because everybody wants to get AI on their resume and say, I was the spearhead for this within my company. But I think because of the political delicacy of this topic, I think that's precisely the reason it has to go to the chief of staff.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think, I mean, you don't want to show up with a completed policy to your head of legal and be like, look, I've done it. Like,
No.
you know, no one, that will not be received well, I'm sure. So I think the executive sponsor thing is good. I think it's also not just about saving them the work. It's also every good legal counsel or compliance person in your organization, they want to be seen as strategic as well, and also that they are trusted business advisors. That's a really key part of anyone who's wanting to progress their career in those functions. So actually, you're not just saving them the work that they might otherwise have to do, you're also able to help them, that you're putting in the time and effort into framing the business opportunity that they don't have the perspective nor the time to be framing that up. Like, I think if in a dream world, if I was, you know, a general counsel in any size company, I would actually have a business person, a chief of staff equivalent business person sitting side by side for everything that I was recommending, to help me make sure that I was thinking about the business implications. Because no one who's really a great advisor is just putting forward the risks.
Yeah. It makes me think about large companies where each C-suite member and maybe even EVPs everybody has a chief of staff. And so often the cross-collaborative team who's tackling an important initiative like this would be the chiefs of staff from each of those important categories of business. So I was thinking while you were talking, Lawrence and Sophie, about COVID, because this is a lot around it's very similar to like, okay, well, there's nobody that exists in our company to lead COVID. So now you are now the chief COVID officer. And who knows who that was? It wasn't necessarily the chief of staff. It could have been a C-suite member or whoever. Obviously, universities have chancellors and provosts, and somebody at most places kind of became the chief COVID officer. Have you seen that yet? A chief AI officer title at all? Or do you think that's coming in the world we're running into?
There's definitely been a proliferation of the title of director of AI. It's different in every company, but yeah, I don't know.
Sophie, that's your title, right? I mean, you have director of AI in your title.
Yeah, it depends what forum I'm in as to whether yeah, director of AI. But even in my role, in every industry, it's going to be really different, because I'm the director of AI at we're an insurance company, which means I'm looking at it from advising our clients on all of their risks that they are now exposed to as a result of AI, and helping them think through what insurance they should have and risk management processes they should have as a result of this new risk. That's very different to a software company where a director of AI, would have to be sitting in the product org.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know, and interesting to hear that we're starting to see titles around director of AI, and I think it'll continue. It is one of those things like a chief operations officer or director of operations. Operations exists in every single arm of the business. So some people would argue that the COO title or a director of ops title is actually maybe really confusing and maybe shouldn't be a kind of a foundational C-suite role. Same thing potentially with a director of AI or a chief AI officer. AI is going to be in every single category of a business. So we will see how this evolves, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more AI oversight titles popping up in companies. All right, so would love to hear, we have a question from Taryn. How do we strive for the balance between AI, policy, risk, management controls, and ensuring that that work does not curb innovation? How do we find that balance in both the policy and in practice? Well, who wants to go to take this one?
I mean, that's the hardest question, I think. I think that's the hardest question. And I think, this is the case for kind of tackling this with your principal, with the top executive at the company, because ultimately, I think they're the ones that are going to have to sort of help figure out what the priorities are at a given moment of time, at a given moment of a company's development. Like, what should be the thing that is prioritized over the other? Should it be preserving what we have, or going after a new thing, or changing the way we do something? And these are hard board level decisions. So I think the answer for that is going to differ from company to company, stage to stage. But it's the right question to be thinking about for all of this.
Yeah. One thing that our clients tell us is actually just having the right insurance in place gives them the comfort that they can move forward. If they are thinking about the financial fallout of something going wrong, and you don't want to do the wrong thing and then be relying on your insurance, but that is one piece of your risk management strategy that should give you more confidence that something catastrophic will be covered from a financial standpoint. And that's why I always just talk about your two best things for you feeling comfortable is drafting your custom contracts and negotiating your insurance to be broad enough for these risks.
Yeah, I think through a structured approach like a policy enables the freedom and creativity to be a lot more apparent, and just a lot of people to have a lot more freedom in what they do if they feel supported in a policy. So last question for both of you. We've got just a minute left here. What is the final piece of advice that you would give chiefs of staff who are about to go tackle writing the AI policy for their company? Lawrence, how about you first?
Yeah, I just it's a historic moment. Unlike COVID, which eventually went away, or mostly went away, or kind of subsided, like, this one is not going to subside. It's going to keep growing. This is a chance to hook your career, to stamp your ticket, I think, to establish a new area of domain expertise that can carry you for the next 10, 15 years. And I guess I'll end with what I started with, is like, as you're building out the guardrails and the guidelines and the policies, don't only think about risk, think about opportunity, and try and build into your policy a culture of experimentation with guardrails. Have a pilot process to try new stuff. Get people a free ChatGPT Pro license as part of their kind of new hire tools. Like, get your company fluent, and I think if you can be the steward of that, good things are going to happen.
Yeah, Sophie?
I completely agree. I would add to that, be collaborative, and also really lean on external networks and advisors that have a good view on this. That includes your external lawyers, that includes your insurance brokers. And I would be more than happy for anyone who is a venture-backed tech company. I'd be more than happy to spend some time sharing the resources that we have as well. We look after 4,500 venture-backed tech companies and about 900 companies. So we're dealing with these things day in, day out. And frankly, we're all learning together. Maybe my final comment would be, it could, to Lawrence's point about this being a moment to stamp your ticket for your career, is if you can yourself personally create some kind of network of people who are like you in your industry, who are also trying to figure it out, that will probably be extremely helpful, so that you can all help each other.
Yeah, I love that. And final note for me is strong project management approach and just start. You can do it. I'm excited to hear how it goes. So have a great day. Sorry, we're a couple minutes over time, but appreciate all of you being here. Thank you so much, Sophie and Lawrence, for your expertise. Everyone will receive this recording and a few other goodies from us, and have a lovely day.
Thank you,
Bye.
Maggie. Thank you,
You're
everybody.
welcome.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.